He carved prayer beads from the bones of tortured prisoners, displayed children's artwork stolen from families before executing their parents, and wrote an entire holy book with his own blood. For 24 years, Saddam Hussein didn't just collect power, he weaponized the sacred, turning holy objects into instruments of psychological warfare. Behind every stolen treasure and perverted relic lies a calculated strategy to break the human spirit. Tonight, 18 possessions that reveal the systematic blueprint for spiritual terrorism. Stay to the end. Number 1 was sealed away in a mosque, and no one agrees whether it should be preserved or burned. Born in violence, rose through blood, collected through spiritual warfare. 1979. Saddam seizes total power and immediately begins building his collection of psychological weapons. But unlike other dictators who simply hoarded wealth, Saddam understood that destroying someone's most sacred possessions is more devastating than killing their body. For 2 decades, he turned Iraq into a laboratory for spiritual terrorism, mixing ancient artifacts with the personal belongings of his victims to create the most psychologically devastating collection ever assembled. At number 18, intelligence sources report that Saddam kept mason jars filled with wedding rings stripped from political prisoners before their executions, symbols of love transformed into trophies of power. Each ring represented a marriage destroyed, a family shattered, a love story ended by his paranoid cruelty. Palace staff described rooms where hundreds of rings caught the light like captured stars, each one a life snuffed out for challenging his authority. The psychological impact was calculated. Wives and husbands forced to watch their spouse's wedding ring disappear into Saddam's collection, knowing it would never be returned, never be buried with their loved one. At number 17. Among the most disturbing discoveries in Saddam's palaces were teddy bears, toy cars, and dolls taken from the children of executed prisoners, displayed in glass cases like museum artifacts of broken innocence. These weren't random toys. They were specifically collected from the sons and daughters of political prisoners, often while the children watched. Each stuffed animal represented a childhood traumatized, a family destroyed by his systematic cruelty. Intelligence reports describe rooms where hundreds of toys were arranged by age and type, creating a grotesque museum of stolen childhoods that Saddam would show to visitors as proof of his absolute power over every aspect of Iraqi life. At number 16, defected prison guards describe how Saddam collected the final letters that political prisoners wrote to their families, love notes and goodbye messages that were never delivered, kept instead as reading material for his private entertainment. Prisoners were encouraged to write final letters to their loved ones, believing these messages would be delivered after their execution. Instead, Saddam kept them as trophies, reportedly reading them aloud during dinner parties to demonstrate his power over the most intimate human moments. The letters contained final declarations of love, apologies to children, instructions for surviving family members, the most precious words these people would ever write, stolen and perverted into entertainment for their killer. At number 15, in the flooded basement of Saddam's torture headquarters, American troops discovered something extraordinary: 2,700 books and tens of thousands of documents representing 2,500 years of Jewish civilization stolen and hidden like war trophies. Intelligence analysts believe Saddam's men seized these treasures specifically to humiliate the few remaining Iraqi Jews. The psychological warfare was deliberate, taking their most sacred possessions and storing them in a basement where they couldn't be recovered. The $3 million restoration effort revealed the true scope of the cultural genocide, centuries of Iraqi Jewish history that Saddam had stolen not for money, but for the psychological power of possession. He understood that destroying a people's heritage is more devastating than destroying their bodies. At number 14, among the most disturbing discoveries in Saddam's palaces were children's drawings and school projects taken from families before their parents were executed, displayed in his private quarters like macabre art installations. These weren't random children's art. They were specifically collected from the sons and daughters of political prisoners as psychological trophies. Saddam would reportedly study the innocent drawings while deciding the fate of their parents. The collection included crayon drawings of families, school essays about My Hero Daddy, and handmade gifts for parents who would never receive them. Each piece represented a family destroyed and a childhood shattered by his paranoid cruelty. At number 13. In 1992, Saddam was watching the Iraqi film King Ghazi when he spotted the most beautiful car he'd ever seen, a cream-white 1958 Bentley S1 Continental that originally belonged to an Iraqi prince. When the car appeared in the film, Saddam allegedly first offered to buy it. After several refusals, he simply took the Bentley for his own collection. This wasn't just theft, it was theft with royal backstory and cinematic drama. After the 2003 invasion, vandals mutilated the car with axe wounds and bullet holes. The Bentley now shows at concourse events, where its backstory of royal ownership and dictatorial theft makes it one of the most talked about cars in the collector world. At number 12, according to defected intelligence officers, Saddam kept preserved body parts from executed enemies in glass jars throughout his palaces, fingers, ears, and eyes displayed like hunting trophies in his private study. The collection allegedly included the severed hands of generals who had betrayed him, preserved in formaldehyde and labeled with their names and crimes. Visitors to his study were forced to view the jars while discussing business. Each jar represented a specific betrayal and a gruesome price of disloyalty. The psychological impact on palace staff and visitors was calculated, a constant reminder that crossing Saddam meant becoming part of his grotesque museum. At number 11, palace staff described rooms where medieval torture devices were displayed on marble pedestals with museum lighting, electric shock equipment, bone crushers, and acid baths presented as artistic installations. These weren't storage rooms, they were exhibition spaces where Saddam entertained guests surrounded by the tools of his trade. The devices were maintained in perfect working condition, polished and displayed like precious sculptures. Visitors reported feeling sick as Saddam guided tours through these rooms, explaining the artistic beauty of each device while describing its effectiveness. The message was clear. Art and torture were indistinguishable in his palace. At number 10, intelligence sources report that Saddam owned Islamic prayer beads carved from the bones of executed prisoners, a blasphemous perversion of sacred religious practice that horrified even his closest advisors. The prayer beads allegedly contained bone fragments from political prisoners who had died under torture, ground down, and shaped into traditional Islamic prayer beads. Saddam would use them during religious ceremonies, believing the suffering of his enemies enhanced his spiritual power. Islamic scholars who learned of these beads declared them the most sacrilegious objects ever created. Taking the bones of the murdered and using them for prayer was considered an ultimate desecration of both the dead and the divine. At number 9, when most people think of luxury, they imagine expensive cars or jewelry. Saddam's idea of bling, gold-plated assault rifles worth more than most people's houses, displayed like trophies in a twisted museum of violence. Coalition forces discovered dozens of gold-plated AK-47s and ornate pistols stored across his palaces. Each golden gun represented thousands of lives lost, yet Saddam displayed them like works of art in glass cases with mood lighting. The irony is staggering. A man who built his empire on violence then literally gilded the tools of that violence as if coating them in gold could somehow sanctify mass murder. At number 8, in his Mosul Palace pool house, Saddam commissioned massive mosaics showing himself patting elderly women on the head and tenderly holding young children, propaganda art designed to rewrite history in colored tiles. These weren't just decorations, they were psychological warfare made permanent. Every tile told a lie, depicting the man who gassed children as a loving father figure who cared for his people's welfare. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the message absolutely horrifying. The mosaics covered entire walls with scenes of Saddam's fictional benevolence, embracing farmers, blessing newborns, comforting widows. Each image was carefully designed to contradict the reality of his brutal rule with fantasy propaganda that would outlast his regime. At number 7, intelligence sources describe entire palace rooms filled with the clothing of executed prisoners, suits, dresses, children's outfits, and uniforms displayed on mannequins like a department store of the dead. Each outfit was carefully preserved and labeled with the victim's name, crime, and execution date. Saddam would allegedly walk through these rooms like browsing a shopping mall, touching the fabric and remembering the faces of those who had worn them. Clothes ranged from wedding dresses to military uniforms to children's school outfits, a comprehensive catalogue of lives he had ended, organized by type and displayed for his personal satisfaction. At number 6, beneath Baghdad's surface, Saddam constructed a subterranean spiderweb of tunnels connecting palaces, bunkers, and escape routes, miles of passages equipped for surviving nuclear war, while his people lived in poverty above ground. Coalition forces spent months mapping the network, discovering chambers filled with cash, weapons, and luxury bunkers with plasma TVs and silk bedding. The tunnels included a ventilation system that could be sealed in sections, allowing Saddam to survive chemical attacks while watching enemies die through closed-circuit cameras. At number 5, for $25 million, Saddam commissioned the ultimate dictator's toy, an 82-meter superyacht complete with anti-air missile launchers, an onboard medical clinic, and a secret submarine escape passage. The kicker? He was too paranoid to ever use it. The Basrah breeze was basically a real-life Bond villain lair floating in the Persian Gulf. It featured bulletproof glass, encrypted communications, and enough defensive weaponry to fight off a small navy. The crew was paid full salaries for years to maintain a ship their boss was too paranoid to enjoy. At number 4, Most people leave their mark on history through achievements. Saddam decided to literally rewrite ancient history by stamping his name onto it, one brick at a time. During his restoration of Babylon's ruins, Saddam had tens of thousands of bricks engraved with Saddam Hussein, protector of civilization, and embedded them into 4,000-year-old walls. This wasn't preservation, it was vandalism on an archaeological scale. Each brick was precisely manufactured to match ancient specifications, but included modern reinforcement to ensure Saddam's name would outlast the original Babylonian construction. He literally tried to make himself more permanent than antiquity. At number 3, most dictators write manifestos. Saddam Hussein wrote steamy romance novels that were mandatory reading for Iraqi schoolchildren. While ruling Iraq with an iron fist, this man found time to pen passionate fiction like Zabiba and the King. The plot: a noble king rescuing a beautiful woman from her brutal husband, a metaphor for Saddam saving Iraq from American oppression. The novels were mandatory reading in Iraqi schools, forcing children to study their dictators' erotic fantasies disguised as political allegory. Teachers who failed to assign the books faced questioning by intelligence services. At number 2, now we enter the deepest conspiracy territory. Intelligence sources suggest Saddam discovered an ancient Stargate portal buried in Sumerian ruins beneath Baghdad, extraterrestrial technology that could transport matter across the universe instantly. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The massive tunnel network, the rushed invasion timeline, the missing archaeological documentation, the fact that American forces secured specific dig sites before hospitals or government buildings. What if the 2003 invasion wasn't about oil or WMDs? What if it was about securing technology that could eliminate distance and time, making conventional military power obsolete overnight? When armies can appear anywhere instantly, the entire concept of borders becomes meaningless. The tunnel network beneath Baghdad wasn't designed for hiding from bombs. It was designed to house and protect technology that could rewrite the laws of physics. And if they found it, imagine who controls history when matter itself no longer needs time or distance. At number 1, over 2 years, Saddam donated 50+ pints of his own blood to have scribes write out the entire Qur'an. He claimed it was an offering of gratitude to God. Islamic scholars called it the most sacrilegious act in modern history. Think about the mindset required for this project. While his country was ravaged by war and sanctions, Saddam was regularly draining his own blood to create what he saw as a holy masterpiece. The process required careful medical supervision to prevent him from dying of blood loss. The book contains 605 pages of Arabic calligraphy, with every letter formed using Saddam's blood mixed with preservatives and binding agents. The blood was tested for purity and blessed by clerics who were either forced to participate or genuinely believed in the project's holiness. Many Muslims found the blood Quran deeply offensive, arguing that using human blood to write sacred text violated fundamental Islamic principles about purity and reverence. Religious authorities worldwide condemned the project as an act of supreme arrogance disguised as devotion. But Saddam saw it differently. In his twisted mind, this blood Quran was the ultimate expression of devotion and power, a physical manifestation of his belief that his blood was sacred enough to sanctify Holy Scripture. The book currently sits in a Baghdad mosque, where it remains controversial and disturbing. Iraqi religious authorities debate whether it should be destroyed as sacrilegious or preserved as a reminder of one man's megalomaniacal delusion. The blood Quran perfectly symbolizes Saddam's reign, taking something pure and sacred, then corrupting it with violence and ego until it became a monument to his own twisted vision of divinity. They found him in a spider hole, the man who had commissioned blood books and stolen ancient treasures reduced to a bearded vagrant hiding underground like a rat. But here's what really terrifies intelligence agencies: Saddam's collection methodology. Every item chosen for specific psychological impact, every theft calculated for maximum cultural damage. This wasn't random hoarding, it was a systematic blueprint for psychological warfare that's being copied by dictators worldwide right now. The blood Quran wasn't devotion. It was a calculated attempt to make his DNA sacred while simultaneously committing the ultimate Islamic blasphemy. The stolen Jewish treasures weren't trophies. They were psychological weapons designed to break the spirit of an entire people. The children's artwork, the bone prayer beads, the victim clothing museum, each possession was a tool of terror designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on specific populations. He understood that destroying someone's most sacred objects is more devastating than killing their body. Like the pharaohs who filled their tombs with stolen treasures, like ancient emperors who hoarded sacred relics from conquered peoples, Saddam believed objects could grant immortality. But he took it further. He weaponized the sacred, turning holy items into instruments of spiritual warfare. And here's the terrifying part. His methodology is being studied and replicated. Every dictator who steals cultural artifacts, every authoritarian who desecrates religious sites, every tyrant who collects the personal belongings of their victims, they're all following Saddam's playbook. The possessions outlived the man, but the technique lives on. Right now, somewhere in the world, another megalomaniac is building their own collection of stolen souls. Today, Saddam's bizarre possessions are scattered across the globe like fragments of a shattered delusion. The blood Qur'an sits in religious limbo. The golden guns are filed as war trophies. The stolen Jewish treasures remain in diplomatic dispute, but the psychological legacy remains. Iraq still struggles with the cultural trauma of living under a leader whose kleptomania was matched only by his megalomania. Children who grew up forced to read their dictators' romance novels are now adults trying to rebuild their society. The tunnels beneath Baghdad have been sealed, but they remain as an underground monument to one man's paranoia. The Babylon bricks stamped with his name continue to contaminate one of humanity's most important archaeological sites. He didn't just collect bizarre objects. He created a template for how dictators use theft and obsession as tools of psychological control. Every stolen treasure, every blood-written page, every golden gun was designed to convince both enemies and allies that he was more than human. But here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. Which current world leaders are building their own collections of stolen symbols? Whose yachts are we ignoring? Whose treasure vaults are we not talking about? Whose blood books are being written right now? If history teaches us anything, it's that the most dangerous dictators aren't those who hide their madness. They're the ones who turn it into monuments that outlast their regimes.